Well, let me start out with the obvious. Happy Easter! Yeah, right. Happy Easter. Hey, right? It's like, amen. It's like, this is a big day, guys. This is as big as it gets. Happy Resurrection Day. Going Southern Baptist on me with that one, aren't you? Happy Resurrection Day. Yeah. I grew up Southern Baptist, so I know that one. Yeah. But what an incredible day, right? That what we celebrate on this day is that something utterly amazing happened. That if you've put your faith in Jesus, what that means is that we believe that this guy who was a day laborer, a guy named Jesus, walked around kind of teaching and talking and saying he would one day die, and he would talk about a temple being torn down that had taken years to build, that would be torn down and rebuilt in 3 days. And everybody just thought he was a little bit crazy. We know his brother thought he was crazy. We know James, who later became a leader of the church, actually thought his brother was crazy. Actually would go to places when Jesus was teaching and kind of like, knock it off. Could you just kind of come home? And then it turned out that he wasn't crazy. That he had predicted that he would die, and 3 days later would be resurrected, would rise from the dead. And then on the day we celebrate today, Easter, he did it. And we put our faith in that because we have 4 people who have told us that that's what happened. Where we have Matthew, right? Matthew, who actually followed Jesus from the earliest days and actually said that I was there and I saw it happen. We have Mark, who wasn't actually there but was a close follower of Peter, kind of the head disciple. And what Mark wrote down for us is what Peter taught. We have Luke, right? Luke, who was a doctor, who said, I have investigated it completely. I have talked to the eyewitnesses. And this is what happened. And we have John, who was potentially one of the first followers that Jesus called. He was a young man, probably a teenager, was with Jesus through his whole ministry. And John tells us that this is what happened. That on Friday, Jesus died on the cross, but on Sunday, the tomb was empty, and he was risen, and we saw him again with our own eyes, and he was there. And it's the belief in that event that is the foundation of our Christian faith. It's the belief in that event that is what opens the door to this kind of close personal relationship, this freedom from trying to earn the fact that you need to be loved, that no, you are loved, you are already loved. And the only thing that's asked is that we put faith in this event, that Jesus is who he said he is, and Jesus did what he said he would do. That in that, we have this new, deeper connection to God through Jesus. And the thing is that as we look at the events of Easter, that we can tend to look at the things we get. It's this thing we could call salvation, where Jesus promised eternal life, that when you accept these truths, that you begin life anew, a life that will now last forever. And you are free. You're free from the mistakes of your past, what we call our sins. We're free from our sins. And even as we make mistakes going forward, we are still reconciled and connected to God. And Jesus teaches that all those things are true. But he also teaches something else. He teaches that fact that those things, as important as they are, and they are incredibly important, but as important as they are, he also teaches that they are just the starting point. That putting our faith in Jesus, accepting this gift that he's given us, it's the start of a lifelong journey, a journey of growing, and a journey of stepping into the work that Jesus has called us to do. That moment we put our faith in Jesus is just the beginning. And whether you became a believer 2 minutes ago, or you became a believer 70 years ago, it's a journey that carries on, that we continue to grow in throughout our lives, moving more and more towards this life that Jesus calls us to. Again, never trying to earn acceptance, but recognizing that because you are already accepted, There is nothing to fear by stepping out and trying to make a difference. So as we go through the gospel events today, and we'll walk through the narrative, and we'll walk through a number of the different accounts, the thing that I find, and we talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about Palm Sunday, that if we just look at the events, just what happened to Jesus, it's kind of big on one hand, so big it's kind of really hard to wrap our minds around. But at the same time, it can be a thing that we've heard so many times that we don't always get a full grasp of how important it is. And the way I find to get past that and to kind of really kind of embrace what it all means is to look at the people, to see what's happening with the people. How are the people impacted? What did the people do? What did it mean for them? Because when we see what it means for them, it helps us to see what it means for us. And as we look at what they're called to do, it tells us what we're called to do. And the thing that's important for us to remember as we prepare to go through the narrative is that, for us, 2,000 years later, kind of in this Easter season, it's really easy for us to just get kind of focused on these kind of key events, right? That last Sunday was Palm Sunday, and we kind of celebrate Jesus riding into town. Then we have what we call Maundy Thursday, which is when Jesus and his disciples, his closest disciples, had that dinner we call the Last Supper. Then Jesus would shortly after be arrested. And then we have Good Friday, where Jesus is put on trial, a trial that the outcome was predetermined, and Jesus was executed. So we kind of go through all those. But then suddenly it's Easter, and we celebrate the resurrection. And that's where our focus should be, is on how we're freed because of Easter Sunday. But for the people who were there, it wasn't like that for them. They weren't kind of jumping from Palm Sunday to Maundy Thursday to Good Friday and it's Easter. They had to get through another day in there. Basically, these people who had believed in Jesus, who had followed Jesus, people who had given up everything because Jesus was disliked by the temple, the religious power of that time. And by being a Jesus follower, you were in opposition to the temple. So you were turning away from the people who were kind of your religious peers. In many cases, you were turning away from family to make that choice. But people did that because they believed in Jesus. They believed in what he was teaching. But then Friday comes. He's on a cross. And he dies. And all hope is lost. They're crushed. As much as they loved Jesus, as much as they loved his teaching, as much as they loved him as a person, as much as they loved seeing him do the things he did, he's dead. We got it wrong. He's a really good guy, but he's not who we thought he was. We had put all of our hope in this guy becoming the king that was going to reign forever, and now he's gone. And the thing to remember is that as many followers as Jesus had up until Friday, he had none on Saturday. There were no Jesus followers on Saturday. There were no Christians on Saturday. There were just broken-hearted people who had lost someone they loved. They're now in the darkest period of their life. So as we start reading the Easter narrative, the thing I'd like us to embrace is that that's the mindset the people are in as we enter this narrative. So as we start reading the narrative, what we want to understand is that they're kind of coming at this with sadness and loss. So let's start with what Mark tells us. So Mark tells us that Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. And what this tells us is that when Jesus died on Friday, remember that it's the Sabbath, so things have to be done by sundown. They basically had to rush him to the tomb. They didn't even get a chance to actually do their burial ritual. So not only had he died, but he hadn't even been buried properly from their perspective. And so they're going out to complete that process. So very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. On the way, they were asking each other, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" But as they arrive, they look up, and they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been moved. Now, the thing that I want us to embrace on that is that for us, that symbol of an open tomb, for us, that's the symbol of hope, right? That's what we celebrate on Easter, that it's empty. But for them, that was not a symbol of hope. He had died. The worst thing they could imagine had happened, and it just got worse. Someone had raided his grave. Possibly someone had even taken his body. So they then go into the tomb to see kind of how bad it is. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. The women were shocked. Turns out there is somebody in there, but that somebody is an angel. And the angel starts telling them what has actually happened. And I actually love the way that Luke describes what the angel says. Luke tells us that the angel says, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who's alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead." Tombs hold dead things. He's not dead. He's alive. This tomb is empty because he is risen. And then he reminds them of what Jesus had been telling them. He says, "Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the third day." Then they remembered that he had said this. So, as we look at this, what the angel is pointing out is something that is as important for us today as it was to them. Don't be fooled by appearances, right? Trust the truth. That Jesus had told you that this was coming. And of course it's hard to believe, and of course it's hard to understand, and of course it's painful. But even though it feels bad, and even though things didn't go the way that you wanted them to, this was supposed to happen. As you walk through this challenge, this difficult time that they're facing, this was supposed to happen. And not only was it supposed to happen, this needed to happen. Because remember what you learned from Jesus. Right? Remember what he said would happen. Well, this is what he was talking about, that he would die and be raised again. And when he talked about the temple being destroyed and rebuilt in 3 days, what he's saying is that your relationship with God is no longer tied to a place. It's no longer tied to going to a specific building. That in the resurrection of Jesus, our relationship with God is now personal. That through Jesus, we have a personal relationship with God. This is the path to getting there. What Jesus has done brings freedom. And in that moment, it all starts to come together. And they all remember. So then the angel tells them that, well, now that you understand, now that you see what's really going on, don't keep it to yourselves. Go share this. So he says, "Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see Jesus there, just as he told you before he died." Now, I love that line. Go tell his disciples, including Peter. Why does he specify Peter? Is it because Peter was so important? Because he knew Peter was hurting. Remember that. As Jesus was arrested, Peter, who had declared that I am with you forever, nothing can happen that will separate us. If you're going to die, I will die with you. And then as Jesus is arrested, someone says, "Hey, do you know that Jesus guy?" Peter's like, "Nope." And he does it a second time. He does it a third time. And so the reality here is that Jesus knew that Peter would be hurting. And Peter would feel like, I have messed up so bad, there is no place for me here anymore. And so the message is that don't let our mistakes keep us from coming to God. That in this case, they're calling out to Peter saying, yet I know you're hurting. You think I don't want to see you anymore? It could be further from the truth. You are as important to me as you ever were. And so the message that flows through that for us is that our failings in life, the things we've gotten wrong, are not a barrier. In fact, the more broken we are, the more hurting we are, the louder God calls out to us. And so in all of Peter's pain, we wanted to make sure that this message gets to Peter. I'm looking forward to seeing you. And then also the angel points out, remember that Jesus has told you this. He told you this before he died, that he would be back and where you would find him. So go to where he said he will be. And in a time, you will see him. And after a short while, Jesus appears to his disciples. And then the Apostle John goes on to tell us that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. In other words, they were afraid that the people who had killed Jesus might come to kill them. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. Peace be with you, he said. And as Jesus spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hands and his side. And they were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. So now here they are. They had seen him die. John had seen him die. And John's here now with Peter and the other disciples, and he's back. And the significance here of we saw the wounds in his hands and feet, we saw the wounds in his side, is that this isn't someone who looks like Jesus. This isn't someone who hasn't been executed. This is him. He has come back, just like he said he would. The promise has been fulfilled. These events are from God, that Jesus is from God. And as they recognize that, they are filled with joy. And of course they're joyful as they see this, as they start to remember all the things he said, all those really confusing things he used to say. Those things are starting to make sense. And I think that not only they are joyful, I think that Jesus is joyful. I mean, he's here with them. He's seeing their joy. But it's also important to remember that Jesus knew from before the beginning of time that this was something he would have to do, that there would be a day where he would be executed and resurrected. And this idea where he says on the cross that it is finished. This is the work that I was here to do. The restoration, the ultimate plan that's always been in the works is now in place. This plan of moving past trying to work to be good enough, trying to work to be accepted, to being weighed down by our mistakes. A path where we simply say that I'm willing to turn around, that I want a new start, and I'm willing to put my faith in the work of Jesus. That plan was always in the works, and now it is in place. The work is done. And his followers are beginning to understand. So with all that in mind, Jesus continues. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." So Jesus is saying that, okay, well, now that you understand, now that you know what it means, take peace in that. That you've started a new life, an eternal life that begins now. And in that life, have confidence. As you put your faith in Jesus, have confidence in Jesus' presence with you and what it means and what you become capable of doing, what you become able to do, how you're able to touch lives and interact with lives. Take confidence in that. Embrace the joy of what it means for you, but don't stop there. also recognize that now it's time to get to work. Now it's time to take what you have received and share it with others. Keep in mind, this is the very first time they see Jesus after the resurrection. And in that very first visit, he says, grab on to what you found and go to work with it. Share it with other people. And this idea that we're called to embrace the gift that we've received and then actively take steps to share it with other people, to actually recognize that we've received a gift and that we're to share that gift with others. This is a point that Jesus repeats over and over. He starts with this in this very first appearance, repeats it over and over. And in fact, John captures for us another visit from Jesus that happens sometime later. And because it seems that, as John describes it to us, some time has gone by since they've last seen the resurrected Jesus. And Peter and the other disciples are kind of starting to get a bit uncomfortable. It seems like they don't quite seem to know what to do with themselves. You know, they were excited that he's returned, but they haven't seen him. They're not quite sure what to do with themselves. So, since they're uncomfortable, they try to figure out something that will make them feel comfortable. And I think they do something that many of us do. I'm feeling a lot of discomfort. There's something I used to do that used to give me comfort. Let me go back and try and do that again. And so in their case, they were fishermen. We don't quite know what all this means for us, so what we're going to do, let's go fishing. So they go fishing. And while they're out fishing, they see someone on the beach, and they realize that it's Jesus. And so Peter, being kind of a very hasty personality, jumps into the water and starts swimming to the beach. The other guys are a little bit more controlled about it. Take the boat into the beach instead. And as they get in there, they arrive, what they find, and now think about this for a second. As Peter rushes to the beach, dealing with the guilt that he had over what he felt he had done. As he rushes there to see Jesus, he may have expected any number of things. Would Jesus be angry with him? Would Jesus need a minute before he could talk to him? Would Jesus reprimand him? Would Jesus give him some special thing he has to do to try to get right again? But none of those things happen. As they enter the beach, what do they find? Jesus cooking breakfast. Sitting there on the beach, cooking breakfast. Not mentioning any of the mistakes, not mentioning what had happened. Happy to see his friends. And they sit down together and have breakfast with Jesus. Jesus that they had seen just a short time earlier. Now they're having breakfast with him. And the Apostle John, who was there that day, the Apostle John was there with Peter, tells us what happens next. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon son of John, do you love me more than these? Now when he says, do you love me more than these, what does that mean? And it's kind of an ambiguous statement. It might mean, Jesus is saying to Peter, well, do you love me more than you love those other guys that are here? Or does it mean, Peter, do you love me more than they love me? And if you dig through the commentaries, there's kind of some disagreement on it, but the weight seems to go more towards the, do you love me more than they love me? And a lot of things start to make sense if you kind of take that reading of it. Because as Jesus says to Peter, do you love me more than they love me? Peter says, well, yes, Lord, you know I love you. So Jesus then says, well, then feed my lambs. And that exchange happens again. And this time when Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes. Jesus says, well, take care of my sheep. And then Jesus asks him a third time, do you love me? Peter says, yes. And then Jesus says, feed my sheep. So why does Jesus ask Peter that question 3 times? Now, some people say that it's done to kind of offset Peter's guilt, that Peter had fallen short 3 times, denied Jesus 3 times. So Jesus is setting the scales kind of in balance by giving him the chance to do that 3 times. And that may be the case. We don't know. But I do think there are a couple of things that are really clear here. I mean, first of all, that Jesus is being clear, that our mistakes don't qualify us. Because, Peter is the one who had fallen short, yet Peter is the one that Jesus puts in charge. So those mistakes don't disqualify us. In fact, I would argue that oftentimes it's a history of mistakes that most qualify us. That by falling down, by falling short, by going through that process of seeking forgiveness, growing, embracing healthy habits as we let go of difficult habits, they can be key factors in how we become able to do what God calls us to do. And I think because the key thing to understand here is that our relationship with Jesus does not require us to be perfect. We couldn't be. And it's in recognizing that not only are we not required to be perfect, we're not expected to be perfect. And we take comfort in that. We do the best we can. We don't just say, well, I can't get it perfect. Why even try? We do the best we can. When we get it wrong, we ask for forgiveness and we carry on. Because I think that one of the biggest things that holds us down from doing what God calls us to do is feeling like we're not good enough. But it's in our weakness that we find strength, and when we embrace that. But then I think another big point in here is that if Jesus says, do you love me more than these others love me? Jesus is saying that, well, if that's true, then there's a natural outcome that comes from that. Is that if that's true, we get to work. We share what we have found. I mean, everything that Jesus is saying to Peter is take care of others, right? Feed my sheep. In other words, teach people what they need to grow closer to me. Take care of them. Right? Bring people into the flock. Grow together. So if you love me more than these others love me, then something will happen. Not that you're trying to prove anything, but it's just what happens. When we embrace the gift that we receive because of Easter, if we truly embrace it, it draws us in to action. And I think there's another factor that kind of ties into that same point. That our relationship with God and our relationship with Jesus has nothing to do with religion. It's not about following the right religion. It's not about doing the right religious activities. Our relationship with God and our relationship with Jesus is anchored in love. It starts with God's love for us, which is unbounded. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. There's nothing you can do to make God love you less. I mean, how much does a perfect, eternal, infinite God love you? Perfectly, infinitely, and eternally. And nothing we can do can change that. So it starts with his love for us. And then through that, we learn to love God. And then the evidence of our relationship with God is our love for others. Loving others and then actively sharing the hope that we have found with others. So I think the reason Jesus says to Peter 3 times this whole exchange about, do you love me? Is because Jesus knew, and we've seen this happen over and over again, Jesus knew that there would be this tendency towards religious activities. That we would get so focused on kind of, I'm trying to be right with God, I'm going to do all this God stuff. Jesus wanted to be really clear that the evidence of being in relationship with me is how you treat other people, how you care for other people, how you share what you have found with other people. That the most important thing that he wanted Peter to understand, wanted us to understand, is that in our relationship with Jesus, the way to feel most fulfilled, the way to make a difference, is to take action and be others focused. Invest in others. Help people to find faith and help those around you to grow in the faith. I mean, simply, I think what it comes down to is that the point Jesus is making is that because of Easter, we have received an incredible gift. But it's not a gift that's actually fulfilling when you just hold on to it. It's a gift that's only fully experienced when you actually give it to others as well. It's in that we start to find our life. And my friends, as we read the Gospels, as we read through the 4 Gospels, Jesus repeats this point over and over again. That is a relationship built on love. And in accepting that love, we are called to share it with others. Again, never a condition of being loved, but it's what we're called to do. So, as we look at Easter, Easter is an incredible gift. And it's a gift to us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He gave Jesus. Jesus' death and resurrection restored humanity's relationship with God. It's a gift for each one of us. But understand that that gift is a starting point. It's a starting point of a lifelong journey of learning to love others, be loving to others even when it's really difficult. It's a starting point that leads us towards embracing the gift we have and sharing that gift with others. It's embracing the action that means. To actively take steps in our lives to share the gift with others. To work with people, be patient with people, be with people when it's hard. And when the time is right, be willing to share the gift that you have found. Not that we're out there screaming at people on street corners. Right? We build relationships. We build relationships expecting nothing in return, just being loving. But in that time, in many cases, people go, wow, you seem to experience life differently than I do. What do you have in your life that's kind of enabling you to do that? That's simply what we're called to do. Live out the strength of the gift that we have received. And as that happens, be willing to share that with the people around us. So my friends, today as we celebrate Easter, my hope is that each of us will take incredible joy in this gift that we received. And we'd each have incredible confidence, being willing to step out, invest in the lives of those around us, prepared to share the reason for our hope when someone asks us.